The Edmonton Oilers have stopped the bleeding with 2 wins in a row. We're going to recap the Detroit and Pittsburgh games and see how much we can actually take away.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Monday edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by our friends over at Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. So today's show, we're going to bounce through the 2 games from Friday and yesterday. We're going to talk a little bit about what worked for the Oilers in those given games, what the main takeaways are, and what you should think about. That'll be our third segment. Our first segment, we're going to talk about the Pittsburgh game in depth and why I think you might want to take the results with a little bit of a grain of salt. We'll talk about the Detroit game in the second segment. In our final segment, we'll do some big takeaways. So at the outset, I said it going into the game on Friday. I said it to my friends I was watching the game with on Friday. The Oilers desperately needed to get their offense going. Going into Friday's game, they had scored 14 goals in 7 games. This is a team with some of the best talent in the world. You know, the consensus best player in the world, another top 10 player in the world, a top 10 defenseman in the world, a former 100-point scorer, a former 50-goal scorer, former 30-goal scorer in Jeff Skinner, somebody in Arvidsson who's been 50, 60 points in his career as well. The Oilers have way too much talent to be not scoring. That was really my big takeaway. And here it is for the first time on this episode. The everydayers have heard me say this a lot, but until the offense stops scoring, don't talk to me about the defense. Well, the Oilers offense did some scoring, finally. And Pittsburgh is, to put it lightly, a defensive disaster. Their defense is just not effective at playing defense. Sure, Erik Karlsson, Chris Letang, both go into the Hall of Fame. Marcus Pettersson is an above-average NHL defenseman. Ryan Graves has been an above-average NHL defenseman at times in his career. But right now, Pittsburgh is a mess, especially on the back end. And if you go back and you watch the tape from the game on Friday against Pittsburgh, you see the scoring chances the Oilers were able to create off of. You think about that Draisaitl goal in transition, where Chris Letang just keeps back skating. He puts his stick out, but he doesn't really lean to put pressure on Draisaitl because in Letang's defense, he knows if he leans forward, Letang isn't going to be able to get in as good of a defensive position, and Draisaitl's going to either A, just go around him, or B, be so strong that he can push him off of him if Letang actually does try and pressure him. So you get the Draisaitl goal there, and you're off to the races. And as we've established all year on the show, the Oilers desperately need to start playing with some leads, because their entire style, what the Oilers want to do, especially in transition, is predicated on playing with a lead. We've talked about it a lot. The Oilers want you to take bad scoring chances. The Oilers want you to take a shot from the point. They want to get the puck. They want to regroup. And then they want to go the other way. They want to go the other way with speed. And they want to force you into making decisions faster than you want to make them. And that's the key to good offense in today's NHL. You want to get the other team's defense. You want to make those guys break their rules within their assignments, because that is the essence of defense in any sport, frankly, that you have rules within your structure that if the puck goes here, I go here. If my partner goes here, I go there. There are fundamental rules within each team's systems, offensively and defensively, that are supposed to govern how you behave effectively. These structures and rules are to give you an idea to fall back on so that you never have the excuse of, oh, I didn't know what I was supposed to do. That's the reason you drill scheme over and over and over again. It's why you do tape. It's why you do all of these components of the evaluation and the education and correction process. You know, you want guys to fall back on their systems so that everybody's on the same page. In theory, strong structure means good communication and good hockey. And the Oilers played some good hockey on Friday. Make no mistake about it. as mediocre and as bad as Detroit has been, excuse me, not Detroit, Pittsburgh, the Oilers were able to take advantage. And the Oilers have played reasonably well in most of their games and haven't found the back of the net a whole lot. But you get the Bouchard goal from the point where the puck goes to the corner. Then Bouchard gets the puck in the high slot right at the top of the circles. He's able to take a few strides in. You see him pick the corner, and then he rifles one back, and it's 2-0. Okay. At 2-0 against Pittsburgh, that's when you should have felt the Oilers really getting the wheels turning, really feeling like, oh, we might be able to blow this game out of the water. And that's ultimately what they were able to do. Look, 4-0 doesn't sound as gaudy as like 38-3 in football, but 4-0 in hockey is effectively losing by like 4 or 5 touchdowns in football. So you get that. You're at 2. You've really got Pittsburgh on the ropes. Pittsburgh is not generating a whole lot offensively. You get the Ryan Nugent-Hopkins puck where, because there's a bad clear out of the Penguins' end behind the net, it tricked the cameraman. I remember watching the highlights. The puck gets to the half wall, and the Oilers defenseman trying to keep the puck in the zone and the Penguin player trying to break out of the zone, they collide at the blue line near the benches. And that puck never gets to them. It dies at the half wall. An Oiler player kind of kicks it, sticks their leg out, and keeps the puck in the zone. And it falls to Nugent-Hopkins' feet. And Nuge is able to drive the net because he's in a good position, because he had been forechecking the puck behind the net. And he's able to beat the Penguin goalie in tight. And then it's 3-0. And then at 3-0, you know the game is over. But for good measure, you get the Ekholm top shelf goal on the power play at the end of the game as well in the third period to make it 4. And my big takeaway, the Oilers are still ironing things out, of course. But similarly to what we talked about after the Flyers game, where they came back to win that game, the Oilers have too much talent to not be able to plug away in these games against inferior teams. And look, Pittsburgh, their individual talent, it's still tremendous. Sid and Malkin are as good a 1-2 in the entire league. Letang and Carlson, for all of their defensive warts, are still really good defensemen. After that, the roster really has a significant drop-off. And Edmonton didn't play around. They didn't give them Pittsburgh a chance to hang in that game. They did a delightful job. And as the season goes on, you need games like this. These are good mental resets. When you can outplay an opponent this severely, they don't get back in the game. There's no, they're hanging around. There's no shenanigans. The Oilers got out in front. They put the game away. They won. Good job on the penalty kill. Got yourselves going a little bit. And look, the penalty kill and the power play are going to remain themes until they really get going again. But at the very least, that Pittsburgh game is proof of concept. The Oilers didn't play amazing, but they played well. They buried Pittsburgh. They didn't let Pittsburgh get back in the game. They didn't give Pittsburgh any nonsense. Oilers pulling away against bad teams. That's important. That is a sign of an actually good team. A team that pulls away against an inferior opponent and just beats the doors off them. That should be your goal. And that's encouraging because the Oilers still aren't going at full gear yet. You know, they're getting there. They're starting to play better, but it's going to be a give and take process. You know, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, that type of deal. It is not a linear process of playing better, but you got to start winning games, and then you can start working on improving within those games. So we're going to take our first break of today's show. We're going to come back. We'll do the Detroit game. Then we're going to talk about a little bit more about the big picture takeaways so far the first 2 weeks of Edmonton Oilers hockey. So be sure to stick around. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at PrizePicks. At PrizePicks, you can win up to 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct picks. PrizePicks is the best play to get real money sports action, so join over 10 million users and sign up today. PrizePicks puts its members first, so all withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. When my picks hit, I can get my money in as little as 15 minutes. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. I don't know if you guys had heard, but Justin Jefferson had been saying he was getting tired of these 80 and 90 yard receiving games. He went way more than his yards for this past week. I think he might be able to do it again tonight. If you're watching Monday Night Football, I probably would be looking at Malik Neighbors more than, I think it was 74 yards. And if you want to get in on the fun, head on over to PrizePicks, download the app, use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. You don't even need to win to get the $50. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL. PrizePicks, run your game. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Monday edition of Locked On Oilers, where we are breaking down what it's like to be on a 2-game winning streak, because the Oilers, it took them a little while to get to 500, a little bit earlier than last year. They didn't come out of the gate 2-9-1. They are off to a better start than that. And the Oilers have a lot of extenuating factors that go beyond hockey that have put them in this position, where we talked all about the offseason moves, the real life experience of losing a Game 7 of a Stanley Cup final by a single goal, all of that burden, all of that expectation, and how it manifests. And the Oilers are still ironing things out. It is not an exaggeration to say they have underdelivered, they have underwhelmed. Connor McDavid still not really going yet. Of course, he's still over a point per game so far, but he has yet to really get going. Draisaitl showed you some good signs Friday and last night against Detroit. You got to get him going a little bit more. Arvidsson still doesn't have a goal. Hyman still doesn't have a goal. The Oilers are getting by right now, largely in part because a few guys are chipping in. And that is encouraging, because the fact that the Oilers have the luxury of Hyman, who scored 54 goals last year, and Arvidsson, who was a key free agent signing, have yet to really get going, and the fact that it is not glaring, that's encouraging. That tells me the Oilers have a decent amount of depth. And as you can tell by some of the lineup decisions over the last few days, Chris Knoblauch made some changes, putting Podkolzin up on the second line with Draisaitl and Arvidsson, and it's worked. I'll save the Podkolzin point for the third segment, but as for the Detroit game, Detroit, another team that's not very good defensively. They have individually talented players. Mo Seider, I think, is pretty good, but other than him, Olli Maatta's not terrible, but he's never really been what he was supposed to be when he got drafted all those years ago. The Oilers were able to take advantage of a subpar NHL team. And make no mistake, for all of the boliviating about an Yzer plan, about how great a job they're doing, beyond Lucas Raymond and Alex DeBrincat, nothing on that team is really moving me all that much. Yeah, sure, you got Kane, you got Kopp, you got Tarasenko. All that's great. None of those guys are impact players in 2024. Patrick Kane is good for a flurry here and there. Tarasenko, if you put the puck on his stick, he can put it in the back of the net. But he is not an impact player in today's NHL. He's a supporting character. He's Martin Sheen in The Departed. Tarasenko in 2015, yeah, that's Damon, or that's Damon or DiCaprio. Now in 2024, 2025, those are supporting characters. Those are not guys you can count on to carry you every given night. And the Oilers, to their credit, they got behind early in that game. That first Detroit goal definitely gave me a little bit of agita, because they win a faceoff clean. Nurse gets the puck. He goes behind the net to Kulak. He puts a little bit too much on it. Look, it's not an atrocious pass, but he put a little bit too much on it. Kulak didn't recover it cleanly. He lost it behind the net. Draisaitl, who had won the faceoff, starts floating down below the goal line. The Oilers have three players, I should say. They don't have three. They have two defensemen and Draisaitl down below the goal line, and they don't win the puck. And Detroit gets the puck to the net front, and JT Compher can just walk to the net front. The closest Oiler is Victor Arvidsson, who's probably 5 to 10 feet away, who gets to Compher after the shot's already been released and is in the back of the Oiler net. And it's frustrating for me, because you want to give Nurse benefit of the doubt. You need him to figure it out. He is too expensive and too baked into what the Oilers are doing so far as a team, like in terms of the direction of the team, that there's no getting rid of him. Like, even if they could get rid of him, I don't think they will, And I think it'll be a while before they can get rid of him. I know we've talked about this a lot already over the course of the summer and the early part of the season, but you need to get him going. He cannot be a -2 every single game because that will start to take a toll on the team at large. And he's playing with Draisaitl, Arvidsson, and Podkolzin. And we can be honest, Leon's not a great defensive forward. He doesn't need to be because his offense cancels out his defense. But if you ask Draisaitl play defense, you are behind the 8 ball. You are going to have a harder time than if you were in control of the game. But that said, the Oilers were able to respond. When you get opportunities to get back in these games, that's important. And Draisaitl atones for the mistake of floating and not playing good coverage on the first goal by making the first Oiler goal happen by himself. He gets that puck at the blue line in the offensive zone. He puts his back to the checking forward. He spins around him and goes around him. And then he just flings it at the net. Like that goal, the Draisaitl goal, the first one against Detroit, that goal has no business going in. Talbot needs to have that one. And yes, it takes a funky bounce on the way in, but that's the type of goal that when you're a bad team like Detroit, that really deflates you because you're in reasonable position. And then an all-world player in Draisaitl makes a play that maybe 10 guys in the entire league can make. And he gets a good bounce because he has because he makes a good play. And when you are playing well, you start to get those bounces. The more opportunities you get, the more offense you generate, the better chance you have one of these pucks you fling at the net actually goes in. And the Oilers, to their credit, they got some of those in this game. They got that bounce to go in. That makes it a 1-1 game. And then you're in the mix. You get that. Then the second Detroit goal is very frustrating. If Darnell Nurse just gets his stick on Andrew Kopp's stick, he can't redirect it, and that's not a goal against. But alas, he's unable to tie up Kopp. Kopp redirects it. That's 2-1 Detroit. And then you get the Oilers to be able to score again. You win the game in overtime. And then real quick, I do have to mention this. Good on Calvin Pickard. It is really hard to be a backup goalie in the NHL. I don't feel like we give enough credit to those guys because they play maybe once a week, once every other week. And their job is to be perfect. And when you only play once a week, to be able to lock into that degree, it is a real challenge, 24 saves on 26 shots doesn't sound that great when you're talking about overall performance. But when we're talking about the curve, the grading curve and the context of Pickard's workload, that you sign up for that every day of the week. If you can only concede 2 goals with your backup goalie in there, that's a really good performance because most nights the Oilers should be able to score more than 2 goals. I know it's taken them a while and that number is going to take a little while to tick up. It's barely over 2.5 right now. But as the season goes along, as they score more, it will afford them more opportunity. And then real quick, I did forget to say it during the Pittsburgh game. Good on Skinner getting the first shutout of the year against the team that does have some talent, even though it's not playing particularly well. We're going to take one more break on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. When we come back, we're going to talk about some of the bigger picture takeaways from those 2 games over the weekend. So be sure to stick around. Get ready to tackle NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. And you can get started with $150 in bonus bets after your first $5 bet. Tonight, Monday Night Football, we have got Daniel Jones' last stand as the Giants head to Pittsburgh to take on the Steelers. The Steelers, 5.5-point home favorites. If you think the Jets are dead and buried, they've got the Texans at home on a short week on Thursday. The Jets, 1.5-point favorites. Exciting, surprisingly exciting game. The Denver Broncos heading to Baltimore. The Ravens, 8.5-point home favorites. And then on Sunday afternoon, the Detroit Lions, Green Bay Packers, big game in the NFC North. The Lions, 4.5-point road favorites heading to Lambeau Field. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Monday afternoon as we try and battle through a case of the Mondays. And look, you can only play who's in front of you. And you desperately need to start getting some wins. Beating Detroit, beating Pittsburgh, those are wins you got to have. When you are a struggling team that is good, that has high expectations, beating up on bad teams, it's not going to get you a lot of respect, but it is important for building confidence. And the Oilers have ample opportunities over the next few weeks to start putting some damn wins together, man. It is really essential that the Oilers start to rattle them off. You know, they got Columbus tonight. That's a game, even on a back-to-back, you should feel reasonably good about. You go to Nashville on Thursday, and then you got the Flames again next Sunday. So you have an opportunity where you're going to play two teams that are under 500 over the first few weeks of the season. You get 3 days off after the Thursday game, and then you go play your provincial rival. You go play Calgary, who beat you the first time you played on a Sunday, and you put yourself in a position where you can make something happen. And that's the key here. You got to put yourself in a position to go on the run. To go on the run, you need to be in position to strike. You can't go on the run if you aren't there. You have to start stacking up wins now, because the Oilers, for all the adversity they have faced in the early stage of the season, this is mostly their own doing. They haven't had a major crop of injuries pop up. They haven't had a significant dry run on special teams. And look, I know the penalty kill has been bad, and I know the power play hasn't been great so far, but we're not talking about a month here. We're talking about a few weeks. And look, I get it that as a team with expectations as high as the Oilers, you don't want to hear excuses. You want them firing on all cylinders right away. But I do think there is something to be said for the value of facing adversity, especially early in the season. I think we have seen historically that teams with minimal regular season adversity tend to wilt in the postseason when they face their first real adversity. It's a real catch-22 type situation. Obviously, you don't want to be playing your way into the playoffs late and struggling and barely getting in, and then using that as your igniting moment. Ideally, you want to be good all regular season. You want to roll through in the playoffs and then beat teams by just playing better than them. But with the emotional component of hockey, knowing how difficult it is to go on that type of run, especially 2 years in a row, like the Oilers are going to have to if they want to win the Stanley Cup, it is going to be a real grind. And facing this adversity now, early in the season, it gives the team character. It gives them the tools and the resources to be able to respond to future adversity. Because when they hit a dry spell, you know, they lose 3 games in a row in like February, they can draw back and say, well, we came out of the gate really slow. We were losing to bad teams. We couldn't beat good teams. We were struggling to really find our identity. And we were able to persevere through that. So we're going to be able to persevere through this. I do think Chris Knobloch putting Vasily Podkolzin in the top 6 was a nice idea. I think so far through those 2 games, it has proven to be a worthwhile idea. The fact that he provides a little bit of forechecking, he provides a little bit of offensive skill. I think his forechecking is the reason you see him up there right now. And because Jeff Skinner is more of a finesse player, and don't get me wrong, I think Jeff Skinner is a very talented hockey player even now, even with his flaws. The fact that you have someone like Podkolzin who was hungry, got an opportunity, and then capitalized on it, that throws a good culture. A team where a guy like that gets a moonlight in the top 6, struggles, and then goes right back down, that's a team that's kind of searching for answers, whereas I think the Oilers genuinely could see a world where Podkolzin stays in the middle 6 as opposed to the 4th line. I think the 4th line isn't great. I think it's slow. I think it's old. I definitely think they need to add someone to that mix. I do think Noah Phillip will get a look at some point in the not-so-distant future as an AHL call-up. I could see them being in the market for another forward somewhere closer to the trade deadline, and then pushing guys further down the lineup. I know Drake Caggiula is off to a pretty good start in Bakersfield as well, so that's an option as well. But for now, you've got 1.5 lines going pretty well at 5-on-5. You have 1 defensive pair going really well at 5-on-5. You have a goalie in Skinner who is playing better as the season is getting going, and you've got Pickard who's given you a few decent spot starts as well. The Oilers are reasonably positioned to absorb the struggles of the first month. Now, if the special teams continue to be this mediocre, I do think then we start to have a different conversation about the perspective. Because by and large, and I think this is important, nobody the Oilers add at the trade deadline is going to save them. there is not that type of player available at the trade deadline this year unless something unforeseen happens. Like, yes, I suppose the Oilers could target Rasmus Andersson of the Calgary Flames. I don't think the Flames are trading him to the Oilers. And B, I don't think his profile, his skill set, would be able to mitigate what Darnell Nurse struggles with in a way that would make it as impactful as it kind of should be, because Rasmus Andersson is a very good defenseman. But it is ultimately going to be incumbent upon the big boys, McDavid, Draisaitl, Ekholm, Bouchard, Nuge, Hyman. It is incumbent upon those guys to carry the load, because the Oilers are going to add at the deadline. They probably add a second pair defenseman and maybe a bottom six forward if they can afford to add both. But none of those guys is going to be able to do what any of the Oilers' best players are going to do if they lock in. There is no silver bullet solution to all of these problems. These problems, some of them are interconnected. The penalty kill is struggling because Darnell Nurse just isn't effective at the components of hockey you need to be good as a penalty killer anymore. And you could say, well, he needs to figure it out. How's he going to figure it out if he's not doing it? Yes, that's fair. But at a certain point, he is what he is. Your record is what you are, what your record says you are. Like Bill Parcells used to say, if Darnell Nurse is going to continue to be on the ice for 2 goals against, 1 goal against every single night, at a certain point, as a coach, you need to have a fundamental reevaluation of how you're going to deploy your defense. And they're juggling guys in and out. They're trying to find who's going to stick. They have time. And a lot of this league is not very good. Like, as much as the NHL wants to pretend it's parity, it's that there just aren't a lot of good teams. So those teams beat up on each other, and then the good teams beat up on the bad teams, and that creates the parity we're talking about. But that'll do it for today's edition of Locked On Oilers. If you could be so kind, please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please give the show a 5-star review. If you're watching over on YouTube, let me know your impressions of the Detroit and Pittsburgh games. I will talk to you guys tomorrow after the Oilers have played the Blue Jackets. Until then, let's go Oilers.